Well, the other day we had a story that dropped from Bloomberg, as well as some more information into the backstory as to what happened with the Nintendo Switch revision or the Switch Pro. And really, it came to a head online when that Bloomberg article dropped. There was also something from Nikkei as well, now I'm thinking about it, but I'll talk a little bit about my reservations on what was said there. But now there's a lot of talk around what Nintendo's roadmap is for the rest of this generation, as it's kind of been spelled out for us. And I wanted to go over that here today and talk about how it could be either good or bad, depending on what your thoughts are on the current Switch. So if you guys enjoy the video, make sure you like it and subscribe down below if you're new. So very quickly, let's take a look at the article and the report that was dropped, and that's from Takashi Mochizuki over at Bloomberg. People do tend to go back and forth on if you should listen to Bloomberg. This one in particular, I think makes more sense coming from Bloomberg, because Bloomberg is very much in the weeds when it comes to information around stock, company valuations, expectations, forecasts, all these different things. And in this instance, it appears that Takashi Mochizuki had an in, or at least was able to talk to suppliers. And what they were hearing, as you can see, Nintendo plans to make more Switch units in the next fiscal year, starting April versus current term. Unusually aggressive move for a game console going into its 7th year on the market. In fact, this move would be so unusual if they're able to do it, and again, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the numbers, because it's something we've never seen before. It's never happened in gaming. This would be a first. We're officially in uncharted territory, which, I mean, we kind of have been just on the makeup and the quote-unquote gimmick of the Switch being that hybrid concept, but this is like way out in the ocean at this point for uncharted waters. But if we look at over here on Nintendo Life, they had a bit more information from us, saying according to a new report from Bloomberg, the Kyoto-based video game giant actually plans to increase production of the hybrid machine in its 6th year after shifting roughly 21 million systems in the previous fiscal year. Although it lowered its sales forecast to 19 million last November, the company is now apparently convinced it can manufacture more units. If you remember, they started higher. I think it was like 21 or 22 million for the Switch, and they just lowered it essentially every time they talked with investors, right, throughout this past fiscal year. And they cited the chip shortage. But as I've talked about before, there's kind of a lagging effect with that. Generally, it comes out to like half a year as you would put your orders in, and then you'd find out, okay, these are what the bids are set at. This is how much of this part is available and how much of this one, because it's not just the Tegra X1, right, that they're having a hard time getting. There are chips that are as little as 50 cents to $1 that's maybe a power management chip, and they're not able to get it. Things like that. There's a lot that goes in the Switch. Trust me, I've taken quite a few of those apart to check them out in other videos. But now looking at this, Nintendo, based on the report, again, this is out of Bloomberg, we'll find out more about this from Nintendo in the future, but if they're expecting to ramp up production of the Switch, we would assume that their forecast would be placed higher than 19 million. It seems like at bare minimum, you'd think 19.5 to 20 million to be a meaningful push up, but 7 years, that'd be a 7th year, right? So the first week of March will be 6 years of completed of the Switch's life. This seems to confuse some people sometimes. We will then be starting the 7th year for the Switch, and Nintendo's fiscal year almost coincides with the Switch's release at the end of March on the 31st. They will then transition to their next fiscal year starting April 1st. Now, the article from Nikkei seemed to talk about plans for their next system from Nintendo in the second half of 2024. However, I have seen people mention that it's machine translations, they're referencing older stories and this and that. So it doesn't seem as clear-cut as what Bloomberg is saying right now, and that is that Nintendo expects to sell still many, many Switches in the next 12 to 14 months. And from what I'm thinking, you're not going to sell 20 to 21 million if you announce that there is a new platform or a new system coming that's going to be better than this one, right? I mean, you would assume so just from the technology advancing. You wouldn't have that system continue to shift a ton of units at that kind of a pace if you announce that 6 months ahead of time. And if they're sticking on the same track for release, maybe in like a March or April of 2024, they would announce that before the holiday season. And that's when you would really look to push systems. Just as an example, right now, Nintendo looking for 19 million Switch systems this fiscal year. They're at about 6.5 or 6.8 million, which means the holiday season is legitimately going to account for nearly 10 million systems, because they still have a little more to sell in the current quarter now, right? So you wouldn't like cut that down completely by saying, hey, the Switch 2 is coming and it'll be out next April, announcing that in October or November. Then people are just going to hang out and wait for the next big system to come out and not buy the current Switch that you at that time have inflated quite high when it comes to your forecast. Now, Nintendo can, of course, change their forecast going forward. So if they're like, wow, okay, man, people aren't buying it as much as we thought they would, we can continue to lower that down as we go along to eventually get to a number that, well, you're going to arrive at either way by the end of the fiscal year, March 31st, 2024. Now, real quick, I do want to check out their IR site very quickly, Investors Relation, as it does show us the next time Nintendo will have their earnings release. That's February 7th. That would be the next time that they may have any kind of meaningful information go out. However, I don't believe we're going to hear about forecasts for the next fiscal year until probably the first week into, we have March, April, and then May. All right, so it's going to be a little while before we even find out what their actual prediction and forecast would be for the next fiscal year. And if we look at the Switch currently and where it's sitting at 114 million, if they do turn in, say, another 12.5 million as they currently have projected, I mean this thing could go. This could actually hit the PlayStation 2 numbers, especially if they're able to pull off what a lot of people would say is the impossible and sell another 21 million in the console's 7th year. So I guess the question is, will Nintendo actually be able to accomplish this? And if so, how? Well, I do believe they can do it. And the first answer clearly is you have games that are compelling enough to sell your hardware. We know The Legend of Zelda is coming up. That's probably the biggest game that they have on the calendar now going forward that would sell units. I know Pikmin 4, look, I get it, Pikmin, it's beloved online, but it's not a Zelda, it's not a Mario, it's not a Splatoon, it's not a Pokemon. It's a bit lower in terms of its ability to push hardware right out there. So after that, though, I mean, I'm sure they have other things planned when it comes to like Metroid Prime Remaster that we hear about as much as the Switch Pro, and don't count out the effect that their Super Mario movie could have, especially if Nintendo has, I don't know, a new Mario game that could come out within proximity of that release, we'll say in spring or maybe early summertime. I do believe that rumored 2D Mario game would make a lot of sense to place there, as 2D games are typically a bit more friendly for, say, beginners or people who don't play a ton of games, as opposed to a big 3D adventure. And that'd certainly be a game that people would go out kind of looking for after seeing the Super Mario movie. And oh wait, I also got to pick up the Switch. But something tells me they will have quite a bit of software, especially going into the holiday of 2023, that they can tie devices like maybe a Switch Lite OLED to, because that's still technically using the X1 chip and would fall more in line with a cosmetic revision with that OLED screen. Although I will say a Switch Lite OLED model with a smaller screen size but the same kind of resolution, that would probably look pretty good in person there. The Switch OLED itself is a significant boost when it comes to handheld play, so I can only assume having that in the Switch Lite and probably getting rid of those bezels that they do their best to hide by making it the same color of the body, it would make the entire system look a bit more sleek. But if they don't want to do that, they could just price drop the system. That I'm sure would work, especially since now that they're getting away from the chip shortage and supply chain disruption, believe it or not, there's a lot of talks and even indications out there in the market from what we're seeing with NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, and others that we're about to go into a chip surplus, as weird as that sounds. But you see how a lot of these companies are cutting back on expectations. They're turning in some fairly dire at times financial statements and reports. Nvidia not having a great time right now. Neither is AMD, although I would also argue that's kind of self-inflicted with the pricing and what they believe they can get away with in that regard. That's a topic for another video, I'm sure. But at this time, if it doesn't take to be an economics major, if you're someone looking around and you realize, wow, there's a lot of chips, most likely the price would be going down then when it comes to part costs. And if you're Nintendo, realizing we could have sold more than 19 million, there's a lot of money you can make there. So Nintendo, I feel like they're going to kind of roll the dice on this one a bit because it's a bit of a toss-up, at least from where I'm looking at, if they can actually hit, say, 20 million Switch systems over the course of 12 months starting in April 1st, 2023. So on one hand, it's good news if you like the current Switch and you didn't really want to hear about a brand new system because you just got your Switch and you're like, of course, they announced something after I just got this one. Or maybe you're happy with how the games play and you just want more software for your current system. I think you're going to see at least another 2 years out of this platform from where we are now. And I'm not even kidding. It's very possible we end up in the first half of 2025 when their next system releases. So Nintendo's going to ride this Switch all the way until, I would say, holiday 2024 at the earliest. Also, it'd be good news if you're someone who's been annoyed or frustrated or tired with the Switch Pro and Switch Revision talk, a system that would boost up the power of the current Switch. Based on some of the talks I've been having over the last week or two, I think that dream is pretty much done at this point, and we're all kind of just onward to looking for Nintendo to eventually discuss their next generation platform whenever they decide it's finally time to move on. I guess this would be bad news if you want the next thing, you want it to be more powerful, more capable, because yeah, it's pretty clear that the games that are coming out now are certainly stretching the Switch a bit thin. Like, it's really pushing this device. But Nintendo, they're ready to keep rolling with it, and if that means that games are coming in a little sketchy looking at times, the frame rate might be lower, but they keep selling, and to be honest, right now, the mainstream's in control. So we just kind of go with the flow at this point. The free market is saying, hey, the current Switch is good enough. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Do you believe that Nintendo is actually going to go this route and potentially end up holiday 2024 or even the first half of 2025 before the next device comes out? And how do you feel about that? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.